Here's a photo I took a number of years ago at Scorpion Gulch, which is a trading post and house built in 1936, and the remnants remain in this little ghost town area of South Mountain Park in Phoenix, Arizona. Typical image, you try to take it as your best shot with the f-stop and the shutter speed, but you still lose a lot of detail with the shadows and the highlights. It's not what our eye would see. And I took these images both as camera raw and JPEG. This is the JPEG, and we're going to work with the JPEG simply because the file sizes are much smaller, and as you download those, it'll be much more convenient. And with file sizes being huge with camera raw, if you don't have enough store space or scratch disk space on your drive, it could become an issue. So what we really want is an image that looks much better, where we can see the highlights and the shadows and more of what our eye would see than this typical processed image by our camera. So the trick to get from there to this is to take multiple shots. You want to do this with a tripod so you have steady shots. But I take the standard image and then take a shot that is overexposed and then another that is underexposed. We're going to take those three images and use something called high dynamic range processing, or HDR. So that idea of high dynamic range is we get a much greater range from the highlights to the shadows and the midtones in between to get something that's processed that looks a little bit more like what our eye would see. So here in Photoshop, I've opened my three JPEG files. This is the overexposed version. This is GO2 SMCC1. Here is GO2 SMCC2, which is also a JPEG. It's what I would say is the optimal exposure. And then this third one is our underexposed, and this is GO2 SMCC3. So I've got those three opened in Photoshop. I'm going to go to the File menu, go to Automate, and Merge to HDR Pro. In the dialog box, now if I hadn't opened these, we could browse them, but I already have them open, so I'm going to say Add Open Files. And those are the only three files I've opened, so that's all that's going to come up, and those are the three that I want. If I had other files open in Photoshop, I could select them and remove them, just like we did in terms of creating our PDF outputs. I'm going to click OK. And you're going to see the little rotating wheel there that it is processing. It's bringing those images in. It's going to create a new document. And this may take a couple minutes depending on your processing speed and the size of the images. And then it opens up the HDR Pro dialog, kind of similar to what we saw in Camera Raw. And I can now make some changes to this image. Let me first point out, though, that the images that we combined are down here at the bottom, and notice there's a check mark in front of each of those images. And I can actually turn these off and have it recalculate based on what's remaining. We use three images, an optimal, an underexposed, and overexposed. That's pretty standard, but you could do more than three if you wanted. Maybe you want to take shots at 5 different f-stops and put all those together. But 3 works really well. Back over on the right-hand side, there are some presets that you can use. You might want to play around with those a little bit. These are often based on situations, as far as you're looking for something that's monochromatic or high contrast, or you want to do a more surrealistic image. Then we have a checkbox here for Remove Ghost. Ghosts are artifacts that might show up in one shot that's not in the others. And a great example of that can be just some subtle changes in terms of leaves on a tree blowing in the wind, or maybe on one of the shots you have a bunny hop in front of your camera and it's there and it's not in the other two. So those will show up as ghosts sometimes, and we're going to click the checkbox to remove those ghosts. And as far as alignment issues, they'll also produce an edge glow sometimes. And so we can change the radius and the strength of those edge glows, as well as to smooth those out. I took these shots on a very still day. I'm not too worried about the edge glow. I really want to focus in on the tone and detail and some of the advanced features. So I'm going to leave those as is. Let's come down to the tones and detail in the gamma. So gamma you can think of as contrast. So let's pick an image. You can see what happens if I move it to the left. We get more contrast, and to the right we're going to get less. I'm going to move it a little bit to the left. Exposure allows us to fix underexposed and overexposed images. Again, if I come to the left, it's going to darken. So now it's underexposed, and to the right it's going to be more overexposed. I'm going to bring it back over to the left just a little bit. And then the details to the left will give us more of softness. And to the right will give us more sharpening. So, and I don't necessarily do these all in order, so as I make changes I might want to come back and say, oh, let's play with the gamma a little bit more. Starting to like that look a little bit better. In the advanced, we have the shadows, highlights, vibrance, and saturation. I'm going to bring the shadows way up. You notice we can see a little bit more into the room back here where it's not very well lit. We see a little bit more detail. It does become maybe a little bit more grainy. With the highlights, we have a few highlights throughout the image, mostly the rocks. Let's see if we take it down a little bit, how that affects things. Not much, but makes the image again a little bit darker, which I tend to like. Now where we're going to get the bang for our buck here in terms of popping the colors is going to be this vibrance. So I like to take my vibrance up. Gives it a little bit more of a surrealistic look perhaps, but it makes those colors really pop. If we go all the way up, look what happens. Now it really pops. That's probably a little bit too much. I'm going to bring it down. And saturation basically the same thing. Of course, if we take it all the way down, we're going to get a black and white image. But again, if we take it up a little bit, it's going to make some more of those colors just kind of pop. I'm going to reduce this just a little bit for my taste. And when you get this to where you want it, then you simply click OK. And now I go back into Photoshop and we have this untitled HDR image. And so that's our HDR image. Let's compare that to what we thought was the optimal image that we shot with our camera. Really makes a huge difference in terms of being able to see those details, especially here in the cactus, inside the building. Now here's a little trick inside of Photoshop, because we can do all kinds of things with this in Photoshop. I'm going to take this background layer and I'm going to duplicate it. And then I'm going to go to the blend mode. Let's choose multiply. Now, there's the original. There it is with the same layer multiplied. Notice the skies are really bright blue. It's a little blown out here, so I'm going to bring this opacity down and play with this slider to get it to where I really think the image looks good. I don't want it to be too dark. Now, with the blended copy, without. Very subtle change. Might want to bring that opacity up just a little bit more. That to me even pops a bit more. The purpose of this video is to show you HDR processing and the impacts you can have there, and then the sky's the limit beyond that in terms of Photoshop and what you really want to do with this image. But I do think we have a much better image through the HDR process.